Okay, perfect. So, hi, my name's Rosie. I'm in the Networks and Energy Storage team at the Catapult, and along with me, I've got Paloma, who's in the Power Systems team. And today we're going to be talking about a project that we did for Mission Innovation, essentially looking at the deployment of different LDAS technologies in different countries. And so I'm sure most people in the call will already know this, but just a bit of background. Why do we actually need long duration energy storage? So we expect the need for long duration energy storage to grow globally as electricity networks are decarbonised. And we need LDAS to support our network operation and to allow for integration of renewables. Essentially, it will allow us to have energy when our renewables aren't providing. And therefore, we need a range of different types of LDAS technologies to store energy for different timeframes, depending on what kind of service you're hoping to provide. And these LDAS services are going to be required across the world, and therefore there are many opportunities for LDAS in different countries. And just a note to say that in this work, we've defined LDAS as 4 hours or greater continuous discharge at maximum power with no upper limit. And we've only really considered technologies that take electricity from the grid and then return it back as electricity, although they might be storing that energy in any form. So that's just the definition that we used for this project. So the project aims. So this was a project that we did for Mission Innovation, and it was looking at the deployment of LDAS in different countries. So we considered 11 Mission Innovation member countries, and we looked at 16 different LDAS technologies. And these were based on something called the LOADS programme, which is a UK government funded programme, basically funding different types of LDAS technologies. So we kind of based it around those because this work was funded by UK government. So we then used a combination of questionnaire responses and desk-based research to consider the things that actually need to be in place for LDAS to be deployed. And there's lots of different things that need to be in place, but in this project, we focused on two main things. So the first thing was what geographical conditions are required. So not all technologies are suitable for deployment everywhere. Some LDAS technologies rely on very specific geographical features, so things like deep water. So obviously, if a country doesn't have those, it's not going to be possible to deploy a technology there. And then the second thing that we looked at was market conditions. So LDAS projects need to be financially viable, and there need to be suitable markets in place for them to function. So that was something else that we looked for each of the technologies in each of the countries. So now I'm going to talk through some of the enabling conditions that we considered. So the first thing that we looked at was storage durations. So this slide basically just shows the time frames. Sorry, I think someone, yeah. The time frames that different LDAS technologies can store energy for. And so by understanding these different timeframes, you can ensure that you can meet different energy storage needs because different technologies are able to store for different times. So these are the 16 different Sorry, someone keeps going off mute. These are the 16 technologies that we considered in this work. Obviously, it's not an exhaustive list of every single LDAS technology that's out there. These are just the ones that we considered. And so in the table, coloured in pink, are the timeframes that each technology can store energy for. So most of the technologies can store for hours to days or weeks to months, but not for years. And that's either because the economics don't favour storing the energy for years. So for things like pumped hydro or batteries, you're more likely to have sold the energy before you'll get to a point of having been able to store it for years. Or it might be that a technology is unable to store for those long time periods. So there'll be losses related to trying to store it for really, really long durations. So that might be relevant to things like compressed air or hydrogen in pressurized vessels. But there are some technologies that can store for longer durations. So hydrogen stored in salt caverns or aquifers, and that can be stored for years. And actually, in that case, the economics don't favour storing for those shorter durations. And actually, there'll probably be another technology that can do it cheaper. Plus also, if you did cycle those numerous times over shorter durations, you'd apply additional stresses to the system, and so the technologies just wouldn't last as well. So by understanding the duration that each LDAS technology can store for, we can better plan and optimize their deployment to meet specific energy storage needs. So the next thing that we looked at was the geographical enabling conditions. So as I've already mentioned, some technologies require very specific geographical conditions to allow them to be deployed, but some technologies don't, and that's just indicated by a none in the table. So if I just kind of go through them quickly, so for conventional and high density pumped hydro storage, that requires elevation differences. And then for conventional pumped hydro storage, you also need a source of water. And you just need that elevation difference to allow you to create that gravitational potential energy that allows these systems to function. For inverse pumped hydro storage and underwater compressed air energy storage, they both require nearshore access to deep water. And that's just because these systems rely on a pressure differential that's created by that deep water to store and release energy. For gravity-based storage, you need things like underground shafts, so things like vertical mine shafts, and that's because you need vertical movement of a heavy object in a gravitational field. Then for below ground compressed air energy storage and below ground hydrogen storage, you need either depleted natural gas fields or salt caverns or aquifers to allow you to actually store that air or that hydrogen. And that's just because these formations provide the necessary kind of containment and pressure conditions that you need. Then for redox flow batteries, it's a little bit different. It's not so much that you need a certain condition, it's more that they perform optimally under certain temperature ranges. So they're just a bit happier if the temperature is minus 15 to 45 degrees Celsius, and you'll just get a slightly decreased performance outside of that. So by linking the enabling conditions to specific countries, we can better understand the countries where each LDES technology can be deployed. So now I'm going to hand over to Paloma to go through some of the market and policy things that we considered.
Sure. Thank you, Rosie. Yeah, so as Rosie mentioned, we also look at the market enabling conditions for LDES. And this is to see which type of mechanisms could support the financial viability, such as arbitrage. These are some of the ones we identify, being part of the balancing mechanism or being able to participate in ancillary services and flexibility services, as well as LDES technologies being able to participate in the capacity market. Other mechanisms that we identify is the cap of floor scheme that, for example, the UK has recently launched. Also revenue stacking, so that LDES technologies can earn revenue from multiple sources using the same capacity, long-term revenue and stability, and also offtake agreements. So these are some of the ones we identify, but not all of these market mechanisms will need to be present in a country to facilitate the deployment of a LDES technology. But also, if none of these are present, then it's also gives an indication that the technology might not be suitable for deployment in that country. This is also very country specific, so as the value of each market will depend on how these are designed. Another enabling conditions that we identify were the policy enablers for the LDES technologies, which we categorize into 4 groups. The first category that we identify are policies that create an enabling environment for LDES. So these are target policies driving the demand for LDES and sending signals for investment. So for example, if a country already has LDES targets or energy storage targets, it will give an indication that the country is supporting or has an environment that supports LDES deployment. But also other targets, related targets like having net zero targets, renewable energy targets, and so on. We also, the second category we identify is policies that create a market incentive for LDES. So these are policies that provide financial support that can reduce the initial capital costs of LDES and support investment in these technologies. And examples of these are the regulated asset-based model that is, for example, here in the UK currently used for nuclear, having also 24/7 clean power purchase agreements, and having a strategic reserve fund. So those are things that can help as well. The third category we identify is policies that provide a supportive regulatory and framework for LDES, basically policies that facilitate the ease of connection. This could be giving grid fees exemption to LDES technologies, or time variable grid fees, and also having resource adequacy targets. Another final category that we identify of type of policies are the ones that provide financial support for LDES. So this provides this financial support, but it does not necessarily create a market incentive for these technologies. So, for example, here we mean things like grants, loans, subsidies, taxes, incentives, and research and development that are very important to support elders, but don't might not create a market incentive in the long term for them. So, similar to the market conditions, not all of these policies need to be present in a country to facilitate the deployment of the technology, but also if there's not of, if none of these policies are present in that country, then that gives an indication that eldest technologies or some of these technologies might not be suitable for deployment or need to be designed in the future for them. So now we're gonna move on to presenting the country results. But first I wanna for being able to do this analysis, we develop a suitability criteria to evaluate the short-term suitability of a country for the deployment of eldest technologies. And this was based in two factors, as Rosie has already mentioned, is the combination of whether the physical conditions allow the technology to be deployed in that country, which we call the deployment scoring, and another factor, which is whether the necessary market conditions are present in the country. So the ones I just presented, and that is the market scoring. And in each of these, 5 indicates that a technology or market is already deployed or in place. So we use these two factors and combine them to get the overall scoring. And a higher overall scoring indicates that the eldest technology is deployed or is currently more suitable in that country compared to other countries with a lower score. So that's the suitability criteria we developed to be able to assess and compare the country's potential deployment for eldest technologies. And if we move on to the next slide, this has the comparison, the summary table of results. So it has a comparison between the overall score for each eldest technology in each country. So as Rosie mentioned, we look at 11 countries in total and 15 eldest technologies. And overall, the main findings or that we got to is that, first of all, that conventional pumped hydro score the highest by far in almost all countries. It is deployed in every country that it can be, and it has suitable markets in place. The second one is that redox flux batteries also score highly in some countries. So we identified this as the more mature, ready deployed technologies overall. And other than that, other than conventional pump hydro and redox flow batteries is very mixed and dependent on a country-to-country basis, which we will now present to you the individual scoring for each country that we look at. So the first country we look at was Australia. And here this table shows both the deployment scoring, so looking at the physical conditions, whether they're met or not for each technology, and then if the country has market conditions that support eldest specifically or these eldest technologies specifically, and then the overall score is presented in the right-hand side column. So basically, for Australia, we found that there are a variety of eldest technologies deployed with a focus on demonstrators for eldest, such as hydrogen projects and ammonia at the moment. There is also a cap and floor scheme in Australia specifically designed to incentivize eldest. This is known as a capacity investment scheme. And also, given this mix of conditions in Australia, we identified as a potential high potential country, as it scores relatively high overall for most technologies, and because of this cap and floor that they have in place to support eldest specifically. Then if we move to China, if we see China has also high levels of deployment and pilots across a range of different eldest technologies and storage durations. For example, China is among the few countries to have deployed liquid air energy storage and below ground compressed air energy storage. And there's a lot of investment in demonstrator projects and integrated them to support the grid services as well in China. However, we found a lack of market mechanisms specifically targeting elders in China. But as I mentioned, this country leads on the development of and support provided to elders technologies growth. So for now, we consider, well, at the time this work was done, we consider China as a moderate potential country due to it having funding for elders technologies, but currently lacking a specific market mechanisms to incentivize elders. But China, given the support and the investment and the efforts that are making on these technologies, their potential will probably increase in the future. Then another country we look at was Denmark. And as you can see from the table, Denmark has low levels of deployment and pilot projects compared to other countries, especially Australia and China, as I already presented. Denmark is one of the countries that has unsuitable geography for some technologies, such as pump hydro. And also we found that Denmark has also limited market mechanisms, specifically supporting eldest technologies. And because of these reasons, we identify Denmark as having low to moderate potential for eldest deployment due to the limited markets that they have for elders and limited deployment due to their geographical conditions. Then in France, for the case of France, we also found that it has low levels of deployment and pilot projects compared to other countries that we look at in this work. However, there seems to be a focus on demonstrators, specifically on hydrogen and ammonia storage. And we also identify that some of the technologies are like pump hydro are already well established in France. So that's in terms of the eldest technologies deployed there. And in terms of the market conditions, we found that the emergence of an energy storage market in France has been hindered due to the limited energy storage deployment, and also because the French tariffs incentivize the direct export of electricity into the grid instead of incentivizing electricity being stored, which is the case in many other countries as well. But we couldn't find evidence of market support mechanisms specifically for eldest technologies in France. So overall, in this analysis, France scores relatively low overall for most of the technologies, because it doesn't have many technologies deployed, as I already mentioned, and also because of the lack of suitable markets in place to support specific eldest technologies. Another country that we look at was Germany. And Germany overall, it's a mix, but the key points here are that it has unsuitable geography for some technologies as well. However, despite this, Germany has deployment across a range of other eldest technologies. And in Germany, a lot of the eldest technologies are supported by price arbitrage, balancing, and ancillary services, and also by offtake agreements. So overall, given these two factors, we consider Germany as a moderate potential country due to it having funding for eldest technologies, but currently lacking specific market mechanisms. Another country that we saw was Italy as well. And for Italy, we found that it has a lot of planned deployment across a wide range of eldest technologies. It has many projects as well. And also regarding market mechanisms, we saw that Italy has a lot of market mechanisms in place supporting eldest, such as direct tender for large storage capacity under long-term agreements. It also has a cap and floor mechanism and is developing at the moment a mechanism for long-term capacity payments for storage. So for these reasons, we consider Italy a high potential country to its cap and floor scheme in place, which specifically targets LDES technology, and because of its wide range of deployment and pilot projects of LDES technologies. So I'll hand over now to Rosie to present the results from the other countries that we look at.
Yeah, so we've got, I think there's maybe 5 left. So for Japan, it's actually got quite low levels of pilots and plans compared to some of the other countries that we looked at. It's one of the countries that's unsuitable for hydrogen storage in salt caverns because they don't have salt caverns, so you can't store it there. There are some LDES technologies that they have deployed, so things like conventional pumped hydro, they have some above ground compressed air, above ground hydrogen, and they do have some market conditions in place to support some technologies and quite a lot of policy in place trying to push for having hydrogen storage. And then some long-term agreements support things like pumped hydro or ancillary services and balancing supporting redox flow batteries. And yeah, like I mentioned before, hydrogen storage and policy supporting that seems to be a key area for them. Then the Netherlands. The Netherlands is one of the countries that has unsuitable geography for some of the technologies. It's not suitable for any of the pumped hydro storage related technologies because the land is too flat, but it does have high levels of deployment and pilots across the remaining LDES technologies. And something that actually, obviously we did questionnaires, something that they highlighted it when they filled in the questionnaire in their response was that it was outside of the scope of this project, but they're doing a lot of work looking at different types of thermal energy storage. So rather than, electricity going in and electricity out, looking at kind of storing heat as heat. It was outside of the scope of our project, but that seems to be something that they are focusing on. So yeah, they've got some demonstrators and some pilots. In terms of market conditions, although they do have high levels of deployment and demonstrators, they don't seem to have many markets in place specifically for LDES. We kind of struggled to find many examples of markets for any of these types of technologies. So it's definitely something that in the future they're probably going to have to build on the markets that are present if they do want to have deployment. Yeah. Then for Spain, Spain has high levels of deployment and actually lots of planned deployment across a wide range of different LDES technologies. Again, they seem to have quite a big focus on hydrogen related storage. But similar to the Netherlands, they don't seem to have lots of markets in place, even though there is quite a lot of deployment and planned deployment. So that's probably something that they need to develop in the future to help promote deployment of LDES. And again, they did seem to have quite good coverage across a range of different technologies. Then for the UK has high levels of deployment and demonstrators and quite a lot of planned deployment. It is one of the countries that has unsuitable geography, so it's not suitable for below water compressed air energy storage because there's no nearshore access to deep water. And quite a few of the kind of demonstrator projects and future planned projects are due to that LOAD program that I previously mentioned that's providing funding for that. And then the UK government announced in March that they're planning to introduce a cap and floor scheme for LDES, so that should help to incentivise it going forward in the future. So we considered the UK to be a high potential country because it will have that kind of market specifically in place to help incentivise LDES. And then for the USA, again, good levels of deployment and lots of planned deployment across a wide range of technologies. Although they have kind of limited market mechanisms in place, mainly seem to be some PPAs and arbitrage. So although there is quite good deployment and pilots, obviously at the moment, policies in the US have been rapidly evolving and therefore support for LDES technologies could change at quite short notice. So it's kind of one of the more risky countries to maybe look at if you're a technology provider. So just to go through some of our key findings. So in terms of high potential countries, we found that countries that had markets specifically for LDES, so that was Australia, Italy, and will be the UK. Those countries we deemed high potential because they favour the deployment of LDES in the short to medium term. Obviously, that is based on current market conditions. And then we considered moderate potential countries to have funding for LDES technologies, but to kind of lack those current specific market mechanisms. So those two countries were China and Germany. So although they're kind of signalling that they are countries for longer term potential because they have got ongoing developments and future plans, they maybe aren't countries to focus on right now. And then high levels of deployment. Some LDES technologies already have very high levels of deployment and suitable markets present in several countries. So conventional pumped hydro storage and redox flow batteries. And this widespread adoption just highlights that, these technologies are ready for immediate implementation, and they're potentially applicable to most, quite a wide range of different countries. There were geographical limitations. So some technologies, as we've kind of mentioned, they have physical conditions that limit where they can actually be deployed. So below water compressed air energy storage and some of the pumped hydro storage related technologies, they're constrained by geographical and topographical features, which limit their widespread adoption. Then emerging technologies. So these technologies are currently in the planning or demonstrator stage in several of the countries that we considered, which indicates that they've got a kind of growing interest and potential for future deployment. So gravity-based storage, below ground compressed air energy storage, below ground hydrogen, in salt caverns, aquifers or gas fields, and ammonia. And then we found that some technologies require future research and further research. So these technologies received low scores across all the countries, kind of indicating that they need more funding and more support to be taken further and to maybe increase their TRL. So that was below water compressed air energy storage, metal air batteries, and hydropneumatic storage. And then lastly, looking at kind of the markets and policy side, we found that countries with specific LDES targets or kind of broader targets for energy storage in general, they provided certainty that these countries were good countries to invest in, and kind of that they are likely to deploy LDES technologies in the future to try and meet those targets. We found that public funding is really crucial to promote LDES investment. So public funding, which is things like funds and grants and R&D support, is crucial for reducing risk for kind of innovators that are trying to develop these technologies, but also for promoting investment in LDES technologies, and specifically those that have those lower TRL, so technology readiness levels, so kind of those newer technologies that maybe aren't as widespread. And then international funding. We found that international funding has supported collaboration efforts to help to develop and commercially scale some of those LDES technologies. And that's really key to ensuring that there is collaboration between different countries. So that is what we've found during this project. So if anyone has any questions, we're more than happy to answer them.
Yes, I was wondering, you showed all these different technologies that would be possible to use as a LDES. And I was thinking, did you also consider the benefit in terms of capacity? Because I think they are quite different. Like some has a high capacity density, let's say, and some have a little bit low. So maybe hydrogen, you can get a little different one, like redox flow and so on. So did you also give a little bit of idea? First of all, how much is done or is possible with each of those? So hydro is very high, has a good I lost the English word. uh, Efficiency compared maybe to different technologies. So did you also give some technology idea about where they are lying?
So that was kind of out of scope with what we were doing. I guess you could, when we kind of looked at the timeframes that you can store for, a lot of that is related to, obviously, if something can store more energy, it's probably going to be able to, in general, they can store for those longer periods. It wasn't something that we covered because that's very kind of independent to each country of how much storage you're going to need. And you'd almost have to do an analysis of that as well to look at, are different countries going to need different amounts of storage? And then if you're going to need a lot more, you're probably going to want different technologies as well. So that's just one of the other things, we could have done. It would have been really interesting, but it was just outside of the scope of what we'd done.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, yeah. You're absolutely right. So this would be quite detailed. So maybe it's now the turn for the country itself to have a look on this and then to understand what is now possible and what would maybe need different maybe market opportunities. Okay, thank you. So now we have some questions in the chat. Just 1 second to scroll up. So the first question is can you give details on companies identified by technology and country?
So we're in the process of having this work published. So because we did the work for kind of the UK government, we have to go through some kind of agreement about where it's going to be published. But at some point, it will be available, hopefully on our website. At that point, we have put in kind of like in the kind of notes of the presentation and on some of the slides, there is further detail, and it does say, you know, if it is deployed in a country, who's done it, where it is, a bit of detail on the kind of actual projects and what the demonstrators are. So I'm not going to go through and tell you what they all are now because it would take more than 30 minutes. But if you're interested, just kind of keep an eye out on our website, and at some point it will be going up there and you should be able to find that information.
Okay, perfect. So there will be a public for the public version. Perfect
Yes.
to have a look
And
at. Yeah.
yeah, and just as a summary, many of like the main projects that we identify are already like on the slides, which are taken from their report. So if yeah, they can just also look in the meantime like the project name and see in the specific country, and some of them are collaborations. So like see to see which companies are behind the deployment of these projects.
Okay. Thank you. So good. Then I would go to the next question, which was um, is the limited deployment of LDES in France linked to the high proportion of continuous nuclear energy production?
So interesting question. Obviously, I'm not actually French. I don't live in France, so I can't give it, definitive. That is why. It would seem quite likely that that could be a reason. Obviously, if you've got nuclear, it's a lot more stable and kind of continuous than something like the UK, where we're going to have a lot of wind, which, you will have points where it does fluctuate a lot. Whereas if you've got nuclear, you kind of have got that kind of continuous baseline of energy that you can provide. So you may be a bit less worried about having LDES in place. I think we also found maybe it could be linked to kind of interconnectors and the fact that France is exporting a lot of their electricity. They don't feel like they need to store it, they just export it. So no, it's something that would be quite interesting if someone wanted to look into it. It was something that kind of we weren't expecting. It was kind of quite surprising. I was expecting France to kind of have more there, but yeah, that could be one reason. Yeah.
Okay. So the next question would be if there is a reason why thermal energy storage was not included in the LDES study.
Yeah, so we've had this one quite a few times because I think for people that work in energy storage, it's a bit of a why have you not included this? It was just one where, we had to decide a scope. We did this, we're a consultancy, we agree on the parameters of what we're going to do. It was just outside the parameters of the project. It would have been really interesting. We would have liked to have done it, but just in the interest of time, we kind of had to do some kind of segmentation on what technologies we were going to consider, and they were just considered outside of the scope.
Yes. Yeah, I understand it would make it a double of work, probably. Okay, many thanks. So, are there any more questions? I hope I just check if I don't miss one in the chat. I think it's fine. So maybe I take the chance and ask one more. How how is the next? So is there like a following up work based on the results you have now? Because I mean, we already mentioned a couple of different things. We already mentioned what can be done now, but is there something specific, maybe also specific to the UK, how you will keep up the work based on these results?
I don't think there's anything planned at the moment, as far as I'm aware. I don't know, Rosie, if you, yeah, correct me otherwise. But I think the main step in terms of this work, next step will be like to, as Rosie mentioned, to publish we're in the process of making this work available. So yeah, disseminating it more, and yeah, maybe in the future, um, this was a work that included mission innovation analysis of mission innovation countries. So we had 11 countries included at the end as a base of questionnaire responses and this desktop-based research. And obviously it will be interesting to include more countries, or to see how things evolve even for the same countries in the future. But for the moment, I think nothing else is
Mhm.
planned.
Okay. So um, I would say that the last chance to have a question, maybe.
If people do have questions and they don't want to, haven't thought of them now, feel free to message us on LinkedIn, or I'm sure our email will get put somewhere. We're more than happy to kind of answer questions about the work. So feel free to reach out afterwards.
Perfect. Yeah, this is a good opportunity. And okay, yeah, I'm looking forward to have to see the full report, to see all the details. I think it's a very nice reference to use and to get some nice information. So yeah, thanks again for the good work.